Let's call our meeting to order this Tuesday, August 20th at 9:30 a.m. And I would ask the clerk to start with our roll call.
Commissioner Henry.
On time, just saying.
Commissioner Tedesco.
Here.
Commissioner Pinter.
Here.
Commissioner Odoricio.
Here.
Commissioner Baca.
Here.
Can I invite you all to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance this morning? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda this morning?
So moved.
So moved.
All right, now that we did that, everyone votes. Passes unanimously. Next up is awards and presentations. It's my understanding we don't have any this morning. Moving on to citizen communication via public comment. If you're here for a matter of general purpose, this is your moment. Come on down, please introduce yourself, and you'll have 3 minutes. All right. Everyone's keeping their thoughts to themselves today. That's all right. Moving on to elected official communication. Okay. Everyone's got a strong inner monologue, I guess. All right. Next up is consent calendar. Do we have a motion on the consent calendar? So moved.
Second.
Oh, there. All right. Yep, we all voted. So that passes unanimously as well. New business county manager this morning. County attorney.
Good morning, commissioners. I would ask that we go into executive session today as time allows pursuant to Colorado Revised Statute 246402-4F for the purpose of discussing a personnel matter.
Okay. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved in second, that passes unanimously, which brings us to land use. For land use, our first case is RCU 24-13. Do y'all need a few minutes to set up? 2 minutes. All right, so we'll take a brief recess and allow the team to set up, and we will reconvene. And call our meeting back. The land use team looks like they're ready to go. We'll start with RCU 2024-13, Riverdale Regional Park, rezoning. It goes to you, Greg.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Greg Barnes with the Adams County Community and Economic Development Department. And this land use case is an application for rezoning that was filed by our Parks, Open Space, and Cultural Arts Department. The application would rezone the Riverdale Regional Park, which is approximately 1,100 acres of land, to the Regional Park Zone District. Currently, the zone district on these properties is Agricultural 3 and Agricultural 1. The site is shown here in this thick green border. The southern border is roughly around 120th Avenue. The northern border is about 136th Avenue. The site is just west of Brighton Road and just east of Poplar Street. As I mentioned, the site is currently zoned Agricultural 3 with a small pocket of Agricultural 1 here in the southwest corner of the site. And if approved, the zoning map would look like this. The Regional Parks Zone District, you may remember, was part of a code amendment that the county performed in October of 2021. That was approved by this body to create 3 new parks districts, one of which was the Regional Parks Zone District, with the intention of allowing zone districts to function close with the operations of how our public parks work, rather than have agricultural zoning in these areas. The county's comprehensive plan has designated a future land use of parks and open space on this property, and that is consistent with the zone district that's being proposed. The criteria for approval of a rezoning includes consistency with the comprehensive plan, consistency with the purpose of our development standards, as well as complying with any specific regulations related to the zone district, and then compatibility and harmony to the surrounding area. The minimum lot size in the Regional Park Zone District is 35 acres. The Riverdale Regional Park as a whole is around 1,100 acres. There is no minimum lot width required for a Regional Park Zone District, so that is not affected by this rezone. And then the proposed zone district would allow the current operations of Riverdale Regional Park to be permitted by right, which is the main intent of this rezoning application. I know you all know what Riverdale Regional Park looks like, but for anybody in the public who hasn't been, today's a great day to go. It's a beautiful place. We did send this out for referral to property owners and occupants within 750 feet of this boundary. We sent 107 notices. We didn't get any public comments on this case. There were also no objections from referral agents that we notified. The Planning Commission heard this case on July 25th. They did have questions. There are a few very tiny parcels within the major boundary of the Riverdale Regional Park, and the Planning Commission asked about conforming to the 35-acre minimum. Ultimately, when this application was filed, staff was presented with the prospect of whether these parcels should be included in this rezoning. Ultimately, the existing zoning has a minimum lot size of 35 acres, so no new non-conforming issue would be created by including this. And by including these parcels within the overall boundary, which exceeds the minimum of this zone district, it creates a cohesive zoning throughout the park. Ultimately, the Planning Commission and staff are both recommending approval of this rezoning with 4 findings of fact, and I'm available if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Team, do we have any questions? There you go. Commissioner Tedesco.
So I just have a question about the reasoning behind changing this. What does it now preclude, and what does it now allow?
Well, the existing operations of Riverdale Regional Park are pretty diverse, but our regulations don't necessarily or haven't historically addressed things like the Adams County Fair or other large-scale events. And the Regional Park Zone District was created to address all of those in our regulations and permit them by right within this new zone district that was created.
And then my second question is you show the park with the boundaries that you showed, but what happened is there a difference between what the regional park is actually designated and open space? Because our property extends all the way past like Willow Bay and all of that. So how does that designation get separated? And is that still in an agricultural district? And if so, why are we not including that as well?
So there are a lot of parks properties, and so for staff bandwidth, we were going to tackle them one at a time. So the first one that the Parks Department filed was the Riverdale Regional Park. I believe Riverdale Bluffs may be the next one based on our conversations. But there are 3 parks districts included: regional parks, neighborhood parks, and natural areas. And so when those zone districts were created, we used a consultant that was hired by the Parks Department to analyze the existing park operations for all of the parks that the county maintains throughout the county, and then create those 3 zone districts that are specifically tailored to the purpose of each one. So it is likely that you'll see other parks properties come before you in the future.
All right. Thank you for the explanation. I appreciate that.
Thank you for that question, colleagues. Oh yes, Commissioner Baca.
Yeah, just a comment. Thank you for your presentation. There are some natural areas in the Riverdale Regional Park. Was there any consideration of designating those as natural areas versus the whole entire complex being Riverdale Regional Park? That's my first question. My second question, it's really not a question, it's a comment just to go on public record, is if not through the Riverdale Regional Park policy, we need a policy, in my opinion, of what goes in at Man-Niholt Lake. I've said in study session many times the amount of activity and development that goes around, that has occurred around Man-Niholt Lake, including the USS Colorado Memorial, which I fully support. We're putting an amphitheater there. There's going to be a wellness walk path around there. Just 3 years ago, that was a complete natural area, and now we have a parking lot and a bathroom and a ship and I know that there's other desires to put statutes and whatnot, monuments along the park. So I would just like that policy to go forward if it's not already addressed in this rezoning.
So I can address the first part of that as in planning. When those 3 zone districts were created, regional parks, neighborhood parks, and natural areas, the regional parks designation was incorporated to be all-encompassing. So it does address natural areas and the ability to maintain them, whereas the natural areas zone district is more restrictive in terms of the type of activities that are allowed. And so with this regional park designation, it would allow for natural areas to be designated within this zone district as well. But it would be up to the discretion of the Parks Department how that's maintained as a whole.
All right, I believe that concludes commissioner questions at this time. In this instance, I believe, looking at the attorneys, that we are both staff and applicant in this moment. So that would bring us to public comment. If there's anyone from the public who would like to comment on this land use matter, this is your moment. Okay, seeing no one from the public seeking to comment on this land use matter, it brings it back to the board for further questions, discussion, or if someone has a motion at this time.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the rezoning of RCU 2024-13 with 4 findings of fact.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Passes unanimously. Thank you for bringing that forward. Congratulations to our parks team. Our next land use matter is RCU 2023-24, Brannan Sand and Gravel. Do you need time to set up? It looks like you're ready to go. All right, so we'll just head right into that land use matter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. Nick Eagleson with the Adams County Community and Economic Development Department. This is a Brannan Sand and Gravel case, case number PRC 2023-24. There are 2 requests before you. The first one is for a conditional use permit to allow recycling operations in the Industrial 3 Zone District. And the second request is also a conditional use permit, and this one is to allow stockpiling that exceeds the height of screen fencing. And this site is approximately 13.9 acres in size. Taking a large aerial, or looking at a large aerial view of the site, you can see the site outlined here. Currently consists of 3 parcels. Huron Street is directly adjacent to the west. West 62nd Avenue is located to the north here. West 60th Place is off to the east here, and accesses Broadway to the east here. And then just for context, I-25, I-76 in the distance here, as well as Pecos Street to the west. Also, while we're on this slide, I just wanted to point out Brannan also has a site located at the end of Lipan Street, their Lipan Street operations, and this is located, as you can see, to the southwest. Taking a look at a closer aerial view of the site, this is an older image, so these materials aren't here any longer. The site is mostly vacant with the exception of some equipment located at the southeast portion of the site. Again, you can see Huron Street located directly adjacent to the west. Huron Street does dead end in this general vicinity here, and I'll get into kind of the access overall for the site at the northwest portion when I go over their site plan here in a moment. They'll also have access to West 60th Place on the eastern side here, again, which connects to Broadway Street. As you can see, this area is generally moderate to heavy industrial uses. There's some light industrial uses located to the southeast here. Also wanted to point out that these operations that you can see here are also owned by Brannan Sand and Gravel. Again, the current zoning for the site is I-3 industrial. The area consists of a lot of I-3 as well as I-2, kind of the slider grid you can see to the southeast southeast and northwest portions of the area. The future land use designation is industrial low. It's surrounded by a lot of industrial low as well as mixed use commercial. Industrial low does typically see our higher commercial and lower industrial zone districts. However, this area has historically been used and zoned for more of a moderate to heavy industrial uses, as you saw in the previous slide. So a little bit about the background and operations for Brannan. They're a supplier of concrete and asphalt and aggregate materials. They typically have operations that consist of asphalt and concrete recycling. And this is done through crushing and utilizing a batch plant for making asphalt and concrete. In June of 2012, there was a conditional use permit approved for that nearby Lipan Street operation. That was 5880 Lipan, and this was to allow outdoor storage of aggregate materials, and that was in excess of 10 acres as well as above the height of the fencing on site. And then just most recently, earlier this month, a special use permit was approved by the Board of Adjustment, and that was to allow a concrete batch plant for a period of up to 4 years on this site. So Brannan is working overall to consolidate sites throughout the county. That's why they're kind of continuing this process. This would include the 60th and Federal location that they've been working on remediating the overall piles on site. And this is to have a more centralized and permanent location for their operations. They're currently working through rezoning and the subdivision process to combine those 3 parcels on site. They have submitted the application for both of those. And again, that's to ensure that there's a more permanent location for their operations out here. When looking at the criteria for approval for a conditional use permit, we look to see that it's permitted within the zone district, that it's consistent with the purpose of our regulations, that it complies with any applicable performance standards, that it's harmonious and compatible with the surrounding area, that the applicant has addressed all off-site impacts, that the site is suitable for the proposed use, that the site plan is adequate for the proposed use, and adequate services are also provided on site. We do have some additional criteria for recycling facilities. The first one is that there is a need for the recycling operation for the benefit of Adams County, that it complies with our zoning requirements for the zone district, that the proposal has the ability to comply with all health and operating standards, that it will not cause a significant traffic congestion to this area, again, that it's compatible with the surrounding area, and that it will also not impact the health and welfare of the community. So here's a look at the site plan that the applicant provided, the total area of the site outlined in yellow here. I wanted to outline in red the stockpile locations. There's a couple larger ones at the southwest and southeast portions of the site, with another smaller stockpile area located in the kind of south central portion of the site, with their recycling operations located directly adjacent to the east of that. And then here's where the batch plant would be located. Again, that was approved recently by the Board of Adjustment. And then as far as access goes, again, they would be coming in off of 60th to the east here, and then you can kind of see circulation throughout the site itself, with a secondary access located over here to the west off of Huron Street. Huron Street would need to be improved and brought up to county standards for any sort of truck traffic off that site. So they would need to meet those engineering requirements before any of that truck traffic happens out there. They're also going to be providing solid screen fencing on site along that area, as well as landscaping. There also is currently a berm located on the northern portion with some mature trees already existing, which I'll show you here in a few moments. And then this is their detention area located kind of towards the northern portion of the site. So here are those photos. These three are looking from Huron Street. Top left is looking into the site towards the east, again with this berming and some of those existing trees to the north there. This is looking towards the north down Huron Street, where those improvements would need to take place. And then this is looking towards the south east into the site again, and you can kind of see some of the light industrial that's located in the distance there. These two photos are looking from the opposite end of the site, from West 60th Place. Photo on the left is looking towards the east. This would be towards Broadway Street in the distance here, and you can see some of the heavier industrial located on the north side there. And then this photo is looking directly into the site towards the west. During the referral period, we notified property owners and occupants within 1,000 feet of the site. We sent a total of 99 notifications. Staff did receive one comment. This comment overall was neutral for the proposed CUPs. They did have questions regarding the overall operations and what that looked like, and also expressed that they did have some concerns over the stockpile heights and would like to see those really on the lower side to help mitigate any impacts as far as air quality goes in this area. And then they did have some comments thanking staff and the applicant coming up with some of those conditions for mitigating some of the operations on site. Referral agencies notified did not have any objections. CDPHE noted that recycling operations would be exempt from our Colorado waste regulations. And then Adams County Environmental Program staff did help to come up with some of the conditions for site operations and those specific mitigations, which I'll go over here in a moment. And that staff is available for answering any questions that you might have as well. So this did go to Planning Commission on July 25th. At that time, there was no public comment received, and Planning Commission did vote to recommend approval by a vote of 7-0. Staff also does believe that the request is consistent with the surrounding area, that it's consistent with our development standards and regulations, and that the site layout is suitable for both of the proposed conditional use permit requests. Staff does have two specific requests for the CUPs. The first is that the expiration date of both the conditional use permits expire within 3 years. And this is really to ensure that the applicant continues to work diligently on their rezoning application as well as their subdivision application, because these are still on a temporary basis, even as far as infrastructure on site gets put into place. So staff just wants to ensure that the applicant continues to work diligently towards both of those land use cases. And then also that the stockpiles be no more than 25 feet in height. Staff is recommending this to ensure that there's adequate mitigation of things like air quality on site, as well as within this area that's definitely seeing a lot of concern over air quality. And so staff wants to ensure that when things like wind and whatnot pick up in this area, that we can do what we can to help mitigate those impacts in this area specifically. With that, staff is recommending approval of the conditional use permits, and that's with 14 findings of fact, 4 conditions precedent, 4 conditions, and 1 note. And here are those findings of fact. And then the conditions precedent would be that the first one is a complete application for that subdivision is submitted, which the applicant has done. That all state permits obtained for the operations on site would be submitted for the county to review. And that the applicant would also install screen fencing to conceal that some of that outdoor storage on site. And then also that the applicant would receive a notice to proceed from the Department of Community and Economic Development. And then going through the conditions, first one, that the permit should be valid for a period of, again, 3 years is what staff is recommending. The applicant would need to install landscaping shown on the site plan by June 1st of 2025. Their hours of operation would be limited to 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Saturday, which is what the applicant has requested. The material, again, would not be stacked over 25 feet in height. The site would need to maintain a clean, neat, and orderly appearance. Stockpiles of the materials would need to be placed as they were shown on the site plan, and any change to that layout would require an amended conditional use permit request. The site would be subject to inspections from Adams County staff. Fugitive dust control mechanisms would need to be put in place on site. The storage of materials will be limited to aggregate material, and then any changes to the type of material would again require an amendment to the conditional use permit request. Some fuel storage items outlined here for protection purposes. The facility would need to cease crushing operations during time of high winds, and just kind of outline what those limitations are for ceasing those operations. That any documented exceedance of the 24-hour ambient air quality would need to be provided to Adams County environmental staff. Monthly reports detailing particulate matter would also need to be supplied to Adams County environmental staff. And then some requirements for spill and drip containment on site, and also that the storage and processing of materials could not include things that are flammable or hazardous or explosive. And then here's the one note, and that concludes my presentation, and I'm available for questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Colleagues, do we have questions for staff? I'm sure that we do. Looking to this side, no questions. Looking to this side, Commissioner Odricio.
Yeah, I'm looking at some of. I think the location isn't what it ever concerns me on this one, because it is so close to the one that they were supposed to be using at LaPan. Can you help provide some of the background information on the LaPan deal? Because I thought that there was a deal that they were supposed to consolidate all their operations at LaPan and move stuff from these other things. And is this like a secondary? Can you help provide some of that context?
Sure. Maybe the applicant can provide a little bit more context, but a lot of this happened before I think any of us started working here. There was a permit issued, as you noted, for the LaPan site. There was a condition of approval that required the applicant to remove all of the operations from the 60th and Federal property. It was, I don't know, maybe the county attorney's office could speak a little bit more, but a condition on one property was not enforceable on the other property is what essentially was determined at that time. So I think that's what happened with that facility, if that answers your question.
Yeah, I will be asking for an executive session then to go through this in a little more detail with the attorney. So we can go through and ask some questions first.
County Attorney, what's your guidance considering the request?
I mean, I'm obviously fine going into an executive session. I have to admit that I am not ready to discuss that. I do not have any documents in front of me that I can look at to help answer those questions. I'm not sure if staff has that available, but I would need a little time to get that together. All
right. So trying to process that, generally when a member of this body is asked for an executive session, the rest of us have tried to make that happen, no matter who makes the request. And so in this instance, would you need a recess to prepare? Do you think you can pull those documents together while we continue on with business? Like, what does preparation look like? And then maybe we could get some clarity from Commissioner Odricio on the nature of his question.
Yeah, I can proceed with us, continue with other questions, etc. in the meantime, and then if as we proceed through maybe listening to the applicant and other things, then we might then maybe we can address the executive session later.
I hear that, and I appreciate that. I think it's more about her work process than your flow of questions. So
I would need probably 5 or 10 minutes to talk to staff and try and get up to speed.
Okay, so what would you recommend as the timing of that would make you the most comfortable? Now or at the conclusion of the staff presentation?
I think maybe at the conclusion, let the applicant present, and then we could take a break and then be ready for an executive session if that's okay with you.
That works. Okay, then. Commissioner Odricio, do you have any additional questions for staff?
Yeah. Are there what the batch plants do have some challenges with the environment? So I'm looking. Can you pull up the environmental conditions? So what I'm most concerned about is at this time just some of the air emission protection. So can we highlight those in particular?
Come on down, introduce yourself. Yep.
2 weeks in a row. Good morning, commissioners. Megan Grant.
Built Environment Impact Reviewer with Environmental Programs Division in CED, and happy to answer questions on air emissions, air quality. Looking at their recommended conditions, these are also be in their air permit that they will have to obtain, probably multiple air permits from the Air Pollution Control Division, and that'll also be something that is inspected and enforced. They will be providing any sort of wind-based information for any wind events that possibly cause exceedances, both to our Environmental Programs Division as well as to the Air Pollution Control Division. And they will be, maintaining those air permits. Part of the request for the pile height is based on both dust emissions, as Mr. Eagleson said, as well as rain events or snow events that can cause runoff from the piles. So likely that would all be maintained and wouldn't be an issue. They have been operating in the other location and have not received violations. When they do have a water truck on site, and will keep the dust down as part of their plan that they've indicated. They'll also have, a stormwater plan, a spill prevention plan, response plan.
Thanks for that. Commissioner Odorizio, do you have any additional questions?
Yeah, I'm looking at our, and I could ask some of the questions also as a follow up with the applicant, but it looks like the only thing that we are asking them to monitor under 11 is for particulate matter, and we don't. And is that going to be particulate matter 10, 2.5?
I believe it would be both, and it would be as specified in their air permit.
Okay, but we could specify that in more clarity.
Correct.
On the record here.
Yes.
And then also, what about VOCs, NOx, and CO?
I don't believe that those would really be as much of an issue with the concrete plant as the dust emissions, but that would also
Well, that's different dust versus pollution.
Right. That would also be something that would be in their air permit. Vehicle idling would be covered by state statute. Otherwise, VOCs, I'm not sure how much of that they'd have. Vehicle traffic, truck
Okay,
traffic.
I could ask them those questions.
What's that?
I could ask them those questions. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Megan, hold on.
Yep. Hold on. Commissioner Henry, I believe you're next.
Thank you. You said that they have no violations. Have we been out there and looked?
I do believe that our new inspector, Jacqueline, has been out to their existing site, and I would have to follow up with her to find out any of her findings, but I don't believe there was anything that was reported.
So do you know how often they go out to inspect?
Jacqueline is fairly new. I think she's been with us for like 3-4 months, so she's probably made one round of inspections so far, but will be on a regular schedule, and we can get that information to find out how often.
And then what is self-monitored in regards to air quality?
So any of the exceedances for, like, under the documented exceedances and that 24 ambient air quality, that would be self-reported. Wind events would be a shutdown if the wind exceeded a certain velocity. And that would be based on, they would have a wind gauge anemometer to maintain that. And then that would be on them to shut down operations.
So we're depending on them to do self-reporting, kind of like Suncor, just saying.
Hopefully with far less potential for pollution.
Everything adds up.
Correct. And I'm sure the applicant probably has some more information specifically on that as they've been, their business practices and as they've been operating at their other sites. And I can get you some more information.
That's what concerns me is
Okay.
their operation from other sites.
Okay. And I can get some information from our inspector and let you know what specifically, if there's a schedule for inspections through the county. And I would believe the Air Pollution Control Division would likely do an annual inspection, or if there were any exceedances.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Henry. Megan, it seems like to meet the needs for the attorney, we're going to be taking a recess at some point and then coming back. So if you could find that information over the course of the morning on the inspection schedule, I think that would be meaningful
I will
to the
do it
board.
right now. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And then I believe we have one more round of questions. Commissioner Tedesco.
Oh, thank you. Not for you.
Oh, thank you.
I'm
Yes,
good.
thank you. You're excused.
Okay, awesome. If you
Thank
have
you.
any other questions, please let me know. I'm here.
No, just wanted to point out, I have 35 years of experience in this exact area. I'm familiar with the area that they previously took over, which used to be the old Broderick property, which then became a Superfund project for over 20 plus years. I believe there's still a portion of it that's still a Superfund project. The history of this portion of land has always been, there was a lot of dust accumulation from the previous operation. I know that they've always struggled with the dust because of their operations out there. But that's not why I wanted to make this statement. This statement is more on the properties that they have occupied and where they've taken over. The property that Brannan has taken over that is just to the south and west was a Superfund project. And the federal government in their Superfund project was struggling with that property over those 20 years to keep it maintained and do what they needed to do with that property. Even prior, when it was Broderick and it was a pressure-treated lumber facility, the creosote aspects and the contamination aspects, which turned it into a Superfund project, was always a problem. Brannan has come in here and started an operation and met the requirements of the county. They have done an extremely good job of meeting those requirements and abating some of the things that we had notoriously seen over decades of use in this area. I'm very happy with what I've seen in their operations. I know that I was probably skeptical in the beginning, but this operation, just because I go by there all the time, I see it all the time. I have a lot of my plant that I worked at for 20 plus years is just to the east of that. And we saw the difference in when Brannan came in and took over and from when the federal government and the private ownership had control of that land. And they've done an exceptional job of meeting those requirements that we have implemented and asked them. As far as the application to the north, if you can meet the same requirements in the north that you are meeting to the west, I think this is a very good location and a good spot. You're off of the beaten track. You're in an area that we have really tried to put these types of operations so that they aren't impactful on other neighborhoods, and we're not trying to find new areas to put these types of operations. And I think that the use of this land in this area substantiates and supports the operation that you've brought forward today. I do like staff's suggestion on the 25 foot. I think that'd be something that would be good. Although, I do know that once you limit the height, you kind of push everything out. So you either have to go out or you have to go up. I think if it works, it works. But I just wanted to make a statement of I've seen their operation and what they've brought to the county and how they've mitigated the issues that we've asked to be mitigated before. And I think they can do the exact same thing here. And also maybe close some of those operations that are in locations that aren't appropriate anymore because of the influx and encroachment of housing. So thank you.
Okay, any other questions for the staff presentation portion of this land use matter? Okay, so while the county attorney is researching what she might need for our future executive session, and Megan and team are researching the inspection schedule and previous things that went on with that, if we could start with the applicant presentation and what you have, and we'll get into some questions for you at the end as well.
Good morning, commissioners. So my glasses, for those of you that know me, are a new advent and I'm still not sure how to use them. I can't see far, I can see close. So we're going to try close, and I know where you sit. Maybe I'll do that. Exactly. So I'm Jessica Lazade on behalf of the applicant Brannan Companies, along with Fred Marvel of Brannan and Jim Brasovich of Civil Resources. And then we also have Scott Legg, the environmental manager for Brannan, who's present and can perhaps answer some questions for you as well. So staff has done a really thorough job of vetting our presentation. They have been very tough, but fair. Thus, all of those conditions that you saw, we did not just arrive there. And I would like to, however, provide a bit of additional information if you'll indulge me. I don't have a clicker. Or do I have a clicker? I do have a clicker. Let's see. There we go. So a little bit about Brannan. Many of you are familiar with Brannan. And you may be familiar, you are familiar with Brannan. However, a lot has changed with Brannan, certainly over the last few years. So you may know that Brannan is a 120-year-old local company owned by the Marvel family, who were born and raised right here in the Denver metro area. In fact, fun fact, they began as employees of Brannan themselves. And what you may not know is that Brannan now employs over 700 people and is a major employer in Adams County. And they pride themselves on being a valued neighbor and a community partner. They invest in education efforts. They invest in their employees. They build ball fields. They do the right thing and support hundreds of local business partners, many of whom are right here in Adams County, because it's very important for them. They live where they work and where they operate. You also may not know that Brannan is a regional leader in high quality materials and services in both the public and the private sector. They employ cutting edge technology, from their labs to their plants to their equipments to their minimum emission to their odor standards, really sophisticated equipment and software. This industry has come a long way, even within the last 3 to 5 years. They're also a Napa Diamond certified award winner, which requires very strict on-site standards and multiple on-site visits. They have received hundreds of awards for their leadership and quality, particularly in their environmental efforts and their safety. In fact, the federal GSA, along with representatives from Senators Bennett and Hickenlooper's offices, were recently on hand at a Brannan location to feature Brannan as a national example of companies that meet and exceed environmental product declarations, or EPDs. And that's a requirement to bid any job that receives federal dollars, such as I-76 or 270 right here in Adams County. And that's because of Brannan's use of recycled materials, the very use that we're here to ask for today. Lastly, Brannan is a dynamic, growing company that has spent several years, that I personally have invested the last few years of my own life, making major changes to its operations and to its structure for the future growth, not only of Brannan, but for the areas that surround its facilities. So first, Brannan closed the recycling and outdoor storage at 62nd. Second, Commissioner Odoricio, in response to the issue with LaPan, it would be wonderful if LaPan was just freed up and all of the property at LaPan was able to operate. After LaPan was approved, the EPA did not release portions of that property. They're currently under monitoring, and so you cannot use the site. We would love to. We meet regularly with the EPA. In fact, the EPA has offered to provide letters on our behalf. They would give us a ringing endorsement, and I don't say that lightly, for our efforts on that site, and they're anxious to get us through that process. But as you know, EPA release takes time, and there is a very clear protocol, and so that site can't be released until it's released. And in the meantime, with the closure of Pit R, we met with staff and said, hey, we understand that this is a light rail site, that that the county's growing, not interested in raging against the machine. Let's locate a site that makes sense for everyone. So Brannan then went back to the drawing board, located the site that was ideally situated precisely because it is heavy industrial, and then proceeded with the application that you see in front of you. So there's no asphalt on this site. The VOCs would be very minimum, if any, off of the site. The site is for, it's approved now. The SUP was approved a couple of weeks ago for a concrete plant on the site. And this application is to do the recycling, which is the material that goes into the concrete so that you don't have to bring in new material, and to allow for overheight stacking. So let's address the elephant in the room. Recycling and stockpiling and heavy uses in general are not sexy. Get it. But in this case, it works for a couple of reasons. The first is that it is located locating, recycling, and paving materials are necessary for the continued growth of the county, for the benefit of the environment, and for the benefit of the environment. So the location is right. If I ask you what the most recycled material in the world was, you'd probably tell me paper or plastic. And the truth is that it's actually asphalt and concrete. And the reason for that is that it makes sense, right? So these materials actually used to be removed. We saw them in all kinds of things. They filled up lakes, it filled up landfills, and now it's not anymore. That material is removed from old jobs, the old jobs ideally locally, so that you're not creating VOCs by trucking that big heavy material across the metro area to be crushed somewhere else. But for Adams County jobs, brought in, recycled material, and then utilized again in the same material, for local roads and infrastructure jobs. So the work on the I-76 interchange project is a really good example of that. Simply put, it also affords for cost effectiveness. So by having that material, by being able to recycle the material, and by having it all within close proximity of work, it controls costs that are funded by taxpayers, and it ensures Adams County's continued growth and its maintenance of infrastructure. So the use is important. Second reason is that the site is ideally situated, as I mentioned. Now, the blue is what is before you today in this application, and it's the CUP for this. The concrete plant across the blue has been approved, as I said. The green is the existing asphalt plant on 62nd Avenue that Brannan bought or purchased a few years ago. So it was an existing operation. Brannan purchased that operation, and all that's separating those two properties is a fence. There are stockpiles adjacent right in the asphalt facility. There's, it's an active working asphalt plant. So it's also not visible from the highway in the site. It was really important for us to locate a site that was internally situated. We heard the needs of the county and the desires of the county. It's adjacent to a heavy rail line. I don't know if this pointer shows or not. This looks a bit like a highway, and I'm sure you're familiar with the area, but this is heavy rail, and it's heavy rail that's up on a berm, not down in a hole. So it further shields activity in the area. It is decidedly heavy industrial in the area. It's surrounded by other heavy industrial uses, and it's nearly completely surrounded by very mature landscaping, which is also nice. I don't know if the photos did that justice. So the goal here for Brannan, given the uncertainty of LaPan for EPA in order to do crushing on the additional land, for those of you who have been to the LaPan facility, it is a very sophisticated, clean, great facility, but it just doesn't have capacity to do what Pit R was doing as far as the crushing and recycling goes. So the idea is to consolidate the asphalt plant to the north and this property to the south in the uses. Now the uses would remain separate. The asphalt plant stays on the property that it's at to the north, and the concrete and recycling would stay on the property to the south there. But it would be one PUD that improved drainage, that improved all of the infrastructure around the area, the streets, the landscaping, and the like, to create a long-term plan. So only two things we would add. The first is we had originally proposed 40 feet, perhaps it was 45 feet initially, which is fairly typical for stockpiles. However, after the concerns from staff, which we certainly listened to, we would ask for a height of 35 feet on the stockpiles. There are a few reasons for that. One is for noise, we have a neighbor directly to the north of the property who had some concerns about noise. We also wanted to point out that we would be limiting ingress and egress against any of those neighbors. We're not interested in using, and by we I mean Brannan is not interested in using the Huron access point as a point of continuous ingress and egress. It doesn't work for a number of reasons, and we agree with our neighbor. The second point is, this is a limited period of time. It is absolutely so we can process the PUD. And in an ideal world, I will be back here in front of you all in 6 months with a PUD that says, here now is this interim operations plan. It allows us to build out everything. It'll take a few years or maybe a year to get everything built out, but we have these operating parameters in the meantime. Elected bodies are dynamic, as all of you know far better than I do. In the highly unlikely event that we were not approved for a PUD, Brannan has a financial obligation to this property for a period of 4 years. So we would ask that the period of expiration be 4 years and not 3 years, just so that it doesn't sit fallow for 1 year if approved. So those are the only two differences that we ask, and we're happy to answer any questions for you.
Thank you for that presentation. Colleagues, do we have questions for the applicant? Yes, so Commissioner Odoricio, I believe, has questions for the applicant. We'll start there.
I'm looking at my notes. So I think we're going to get some legal advice later, so we'll do that in executive session. So just if I understand correctly, though, originally the deal was that you guys would vacate 60th Avenue, go to LaPan, and when LaPan opened up by the EPA. And that makes a lot of sense. I will say I do like the idea of these can we go back to the map?
Sure.
Of the properties that you own and the differences
right here?
Yeah,
or do you want the one that's an actual map? I think staff has that, whichever you prefer, Commissioner.
Let's just go with the one that you just had. I like that, actually. So the green is where you want to do the batch plant.
The green is actually an existing asphalt plant that's in full compliance and won't be changing.
That's yours.
Yes, correct.
And then the blue is where you want to add another batch plant.
The batch plant has already been approved. This is where we are before you today to add the recycling use, so that the piles can be, so that we can overheight stack. Because as you can imagine, if you can only stack to fence height, that's pretty hard to run a concrete plant doing that.
So you got batch
and recycling, so that the concrete can actually be recycled on site and used in that concrete material.
To send across the fence to the batch.
No, that's asphalt to the north. So this is not an asphalt plant.
Yes,
this is concrete. Yeah. And it took me a long time to figure out.
And then you have your offices to the left.
Brannan offices are not located. I mean, there's some.
I thought where's the LaPan facility?
Brannan is down to the south. So
okay, so it's not
on this map, but if staff wanted to go to theirs.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. So LaPan is right there. And it's separated by a big railroad. So I know it looks like you could just go right across, and in fact, you can't.
Got it. Okay.
You can't even see one from the other, actually.
And which one does the commuter rail go by?
The commuter rail goes by LaPan. It's roughly down here.
Got it. That's the commuter rail, not the heavy one that goes. Okay.
Yeah, heavy rail is right up here. Heavy rail borders the site.
I can see the economic benefit of having all this close together. What will happen with 60th Avenue?
60th Avenue, we are, Brannan understands that it is adjacent to a light rail site and that there are perhaps some higher and better uses. There are some floodplain issues with that site, as you know, so we're working through those to make sure that either Brannan or a buyer to that site would have the highest and best use of the site given the floodplain issues. That requires a little bit of mile-high flood control input, and as you know, sometimes that takes time.
Yeah.
But it will. The plan is certainly for that property to either remain and be developed by Brannan itself, or perhaps sold. So it's all up in the air right now. I can say that the site is zoned industrial, and it could continue to be operated under certain uses as industrial. That's not Brannan's desire right now. They understand what the county foresees with that site in the area, and they're very understanding of that.
Got it. All right. I have a couple more questions. So I'm looking at, would you be willing to do some of the stuff? You guys, I want to congratulate you on that EPA thing.
Thank you.
But that to me, that
it has been a
indicates
long, difficult.
and that's based on your
road.
projects out in the community. And I think what that indicates.
Excuse me, if my colleagues could keep the chatter to a minimum, like so we can have our conversations be on the record, that would be great. Continues. Chaz, if you, Mr. Tedesco, if you could keep our conversations on the record so we can be in compliance, that would be great. I understand, and let's make sure those explanations are on the record during a land use matter. Go ahead, Commissioner Odoricio.
Okay. So I think you guys have, like, what I'm saying is, like, I think what you're kind of getting at is that the projects out in the community you got recognized for with the EPA with that recent thing, right? And so I think that indicates that you're willing to also go above and beyond on the sites where you do the processing as well.
Correct.
And so I know that this is I've been following the public stuff as the discussions down in Dougco, and I will say I watched it and paid attention, and I will say that what you guys committed to, whether it was ultimately required or not, I thought was really good. And I want to know if you'd be willing to take on some of those same conditions here as a good faith measure of environmental protections that you were willing to do down there. And that includes like the baseline of air quality at the beginning, the continuous monitoring, that includes the PM as well as the VOCs and the carbon monoxide and the NOx, those types of things. I thought I was actually going to compliment you because I think you guys are showing that if you're willing to do it there, can you also be willing to do those types of things in Adams County?
These are great points, and I really appreciate you pointing that out. This facility is a little bit different, well, very different, in that it is it is entirely an asphalt facility, and so here the asphalt facility is an existing facility, but the monitoring requirements that your environmental staff actually created, we modeled that just as a note to self. We took the exact language, so kudos to your environmental department. Yeah, so some of those very approvals that were above and beyond down there were because of what your own staff recommended here. So with regards to the particulates, we have monitoring of particulates. Those are ongoing. The APENs require that. CDPHE requires that. The on-site monitoring of VOCs and those kinds of issues, I mean, truly, this site doesn't produce really any VOCs. It's VOCs are something that come more from burning, right? And so the burning is the asphalt. It isn't this facility. The particulate measurement, Scott, perhaps our environmental, maybe if you all are still considering breaking for an executive session,
sure,
we can discuss that, just so that I don't want to commit them to something that
totally
for some
makes sense.
reason
And
is
if
an
I could
issue.
I'll do the dump of all the questions.
Okay,
and then,
great.
Then when we go back and have our conversation, you have your conversation, and then when we come back, the things I wanted to say is like the baseline air quality, the continuous monitoring, I think goes to a lot of what I heard from Eva, which was the difference between monitoring versus self-reporting based on modeling. And I think there's a difference. And so actual monitoring that we get access to that data or is publicly available is different than modeling internally and self-reported. Does that, and so I, as a matter of policy, am asking for lots of more monitoring to show the actual impacts rather than the modeling of, well, according to this equation on a spreadsheet back in an office. So
Sure.
I will be asking about that. And you do have a requirement here for regular reporting to us, and then maybe it's up to us if we want to make it public. It will be a public record at that
Right.
point. And then tell me the other parts about some of the emission things that you were doing down there that may or may not apply here. I mean, you could always apply them to the property next to you as a good faith measure too, but we can't require it here, it sounds like.
Well, actually, I have some, there are some thoughts on ways. Again, we have an application, not that we are discussing a future application. It is our concept to include the asphalt plant in a PUD, which would be coming before this body. And at that point, it would probably be very appropriate for this body to weigh in on conditions of approval for a PUD that might involve the asphalt plant.
So
But for today,
is this two different properties or is it the same
yes,
property?
they're two different properties. And so for enforceability, not that I am commenting on the legality, Commissioner, but perhaps the county, I don't want to send the county or entertain an issue with one property being conditioned or approval being conditioned upon another. Perhaps Ms. Miller would
I think
like
what
to
you're doing is some
comment.
positive redirection of where some of the more details of some of these conditions might be more applicable is what I'm hearing from you.
Correct.
I think you did it very appropriately. And it's be about the filters, the air quality, the suppression, the wet suppression, those types of things that I was.
Yes, sir.
So those are the kind of questions I'm going to ask is what are some of those things that you were willing to do in Douglas County that you're also willing to do in Adams County? And I don't expect you to answer that now.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do the right thing, institute really good quality equipment. There's an environmental manager who manages all of the programs and takes his job very seriously. Brannan's changed a lot. The last time that you saw applications in front of Brannan, this industry's changed, Brannan's changed, companies grow, and they have spent a lot of time backfilling their infrastructure to make sure that they have the right people and the right equipment so that going forward, they can answer all of these questions and be fully accountable, including restructuring to a position where there's an actual facilities compliance person that makes sure. You can imagine there are a lot of land use issues. And so when you're depending on a plant manager, for example, to say, oh, I think we're supposed to do this with land use, or we're not supposed to, or a pile's supposed to be this high. They're implementing very strict infrastructure to make sure that all of that is monitored on an ongoing basis, and it's to their benefit as well. So.
Thank you for that, Ms. Elizabeth. I believe that concludes Commissioner Odorizio's questions. I believe Commissioner Tedesco is up next if he has a question or a comment, and
Sure.
then we'll go around to the rest of the board.
Since I was asked by the chair to explain my comments that I was making behind the scenes, I'll go over this map and maybe you can help me point it out. If you're looking at the property that we're looking at, yes, these are two separate facilities. They are not being addressed today. The only part that is being addressed today is that outlined in the blue. Why we're mixing two properties together and trying to do that is beyond me, but the chair felt it not necessary to point that out. I do want to make sure that we understand that down in the other portion where we say that we had a deal, but we didn't have a deal, there is no legal precedence for saying that we had a deal down in there. We approved the property and the use that it was approved for. Based on that, there is still restrictions because of the Superfund cleanup and the properties associated to the Superfund cleanup. And the only other thing that I had said off the record, behind the mic, was that the property to the north of that facility in between Huron and Pecos was all a fly ash dump at the time. And there are certain restrictions as to what you can build on there and how you can build it. We've seen that with some of the properties that have had to be reevaluated in their use. So that's all I wanted to point out is what I was talking about. Keep it on public record. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions, comments from colleagues? Commissioner Baca.
Yeah, I just have a really simple question. So the property on the south, you're adding a recycle plant. Does Brannan have a recycle plant currently? And where is that? If you do, where is it located?
The recycling was on Pit R, which has been closed. There is recycling on here at Lipan, but again, that's predominantly for the asphalt plant. So we're talking about concrete recycling to feed a concrete plant, and there is no other facility like that in direct proximity.
Okay, I really appreciate that. And if I can just make a a comment. Thank you for that clarification on the recycle plant. I did attend the EPA. It was also the General Services Administration had an award, a recognition for Brannan, if you want to clarify that, at LaPan. And I was able to attend, and we also took a little tour of LaPan. And when I say we, it was the General Services Administration, some other delegates as well, and then Brannan's staff. And they were able to explain what occurs at the LaPan plant. And I just have to say on the record, first of all, congratulations for that recognition. That was substantial. And the director made, she did not mince her words when it came to recycle, the significance of recycled material, both asphalt and concrete, the usage of that, and how Brannan was able to utilize that for your customers. And then that went into deeper conversations. And we did get a little schooled, Adams County, by the director of the General Services Administration, that perhaps the state of Colorado asphalt standards, there's better standards that are out there. And actually Brannan is a company that has a more environmentally safe products than what is on that CDOT is currently using. So I want to make that point, that really is substantial. I know that pavement varies on usage and weight, and of course, is it here? Is it in the mountains? Like where is it being laid, and what is its usage? So I do want to make that point about LaPan. As far as the concrete, you're right. I think people think recycling and they're like, I'm doing a great job recycling my aluminum cans and all of these tens of thousands of water bottles when I go camping with my family. And it really is down to the basics of asphalt and concrete, of breaking it all down to the rocks and to the materials, able to reutilize that. And we were able to go up in the tower at LaPan and look at the mixers and the little cockpit that you have up there. It's really air traffic control, all computerized on the mix. And so that's really impressive. I think the operation, this industry has really come a long way. We are all focused at large, when I say we, on environmental impacts and what that looks like. The fact of the matter is that, to be very pragmatic, is that recycling plants are needed. And they're needed here in Adams County. You know, we are the logistical epicenter for the entire region, the entire state. And when I go out and talk with business, and I talk with, of course, the EPA when we do our lobbying efforts in Washington, is that we're not the backbone just for Adams County. We're the backbone for the entire state of Colorado. When we have all of the state interstate systems run through Adams County, E470 runs through Adams County, and all the rail systems run through Adams County. So I just want to make those few points when we look at this, and I appreciate the owner being here and your clients, and for your presentation. So that's all I have. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Commissioner Baca. Anything else, colleagues? Okay, just as a wrap up, my colleagues asked a lot of really detailed questions. I agree with the summary that Commissioner Baca just provided. Thank you for your diligence, both in this site and all the sites that you work on in Colorado. This is a necessary product, and to do it better, safer, cleaner is worth all the time and effort that we all put in. Y'all have been in business. Brandon's been in business a long, long time. And so as professional development continues, as engineering development, air quality, water engineering, all of those things develop, we learn more, we do better. And when we do better, it enriches the whole community. And you have put a great foot forward today in those conversations of how do we do better. And I think one of the things that we often discuss as a board when having these conversations is not just your personal commentary today or your best business practices, but how do we codify that something that that goes with the land and goes with the operations. And that's where we're asking questions of our staff, we're asking questions of our attorney, asking questions of you to make sure that these best practices that you're highlighting end up getting written into how the land is set up, so that Mr. Marvel wasn't always in charge, but so whoever chooses to be in charge 20 years from now also is following the professional standards that we are working so diligently on to get right today. So thank you for answering all of our questions so thoroughly. If there isn't anything else for the applicant, we're going to continue our discussions. I'm going to look to the county attorney if we're ready to take that break. Okay, so thank you, Ms. Elizade.
Thank you. I would just ask again with the conditions so that they don't get lost in the rest of the discussion. Additionally, we have asked that the stockpiles be 35 feet and that.
We did hear that, yes.
Okay,
thank
great.
you.
So 35 feet on the stockpiles rather than the 45 feet in the application, but certainly higher than the 25 feet that staff has recommended. Additionally, for 4 years on the expiration of the PUD rather than 3.
Yes, thank you for reminding us to make note of that. I did hear you make that request. We will discuss that when we're back on the record as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before we go into executive session, I want to check with the public. Usually we have staff presentation, applicant presentation, and then a moment for citizen commentary. Is there anyone here that is from the public who would like to make a comment? Yes, ma'am. Come on down, introduce yourself, name and address, and you will have 3 minutes.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Marcella Cervetti, 6041 Huron. I'm actually the property to the west of the property that is outlined there. And I just wanted to reiterate, I did send in written comments regarding limiting the stockpile, as the planner suggested, to 25 feet, or in my layman terms, 2.5 stories versus 4.5 stories. As the planner suggested, I have spoken with the owner, Mr. Marble, and I will go on the record saying that he's been very accommodating, very willing to work with us when we've had any issues. So I do expect him to be a good neighbor. So there's no reason for me not to believe that. So I'm looking forward to having him as a neighbor, but I would ask that you limit those stockpiles. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Anything else? Anyone else from the public? I do think I physically recognize everyone else who's seated here, so I think that might be everyone who might comment from the public, but just in case. Okay, that concludes our public communication for the moment. Before we go to board discussion, County Attorney, are you ready for an executive session, and how would you like that titled?
If I could have 5 minutes before we go into executive session, but we could go ahead and vote on it now.
That sounds good.
And that is pursuant to Colorado Revised Statute 246402-4B for the purpose of receiving legal advice.
Okay, do we have a motion on that?
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Odorizio,
Yes.
Commissioner Henry,
Yes.
Commissioner Tedesco,
Yes.
Commissioner Baca,
Yes.
Commissioner Pinter.
Yes. All right, so we'll go ahead and take a recess, allow the county attorney to conclude her research. We'll do executive session, and we will come back when we've concluded that executive session. So thank you all, and hang out. We'll be back. can get started. I'm happy to have you come back up, Ms. Elisa Day.
Do you want me just to sit? I was trying to be proactive. Would you prefer me to sit? Do you have additional questions or?
I don't know that we have additional questions for the applicant at this time. Thank you so.
Great.
Oh, you do. Okay, that's totally fine. Let's get started with you, and then we'll chat with staff afterwards.
So I just have a couple of clarifications. So Brannan is a family that works and lives in Adams County?
Brannan works in Adams County, headquartered in Adams County, does not
live
in Adams County.
Okay. And then, I was under the impression that this recycling plant is mainly going to be used by surrounding areas and just Adams County, or is it for the whole region, Denver region?
It doesn't. So there's no particular limitation, but it doesn't make sense for jobs that are within a certain area to haul that far for a number of cost reasons. So no particular limitation, but a practical limitation that's just not the way things are done.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm done, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the applicant, or let's hear from Commissioner Odoricio.
Okay, so when we left, I asked questions about some of the other additional above and beyond, even more than what we have here, conditions you guys might be willing to add on the environmental side, knowing that not all of the things that apply at DevCo may apply to this specific case.
Sure.
But I like seeing you guys raise the bar, and I think it's important for you guys to continue doing that, both in your projects outside in the community as well as what you're doing within your facilities. And I think that shows a lot of good faith. So what did you guys come back with as far as what you can do?
So there are a number of environmental measures that we didn't necessarily go over in this app that are contained within this application that I think are important to point out. First, again, this is just recycling to support the approved concrete plant. So it's already approved. And the VOCs, this is on the equipment operates on line power. It's not off of diesel or generator power or that kind of motor power. So they're really, other than just trucks on the site, there are no additional VOCs that are produced. This is not a VOC producing facility. So a lot of the monitoring that you saw is specific to, that was implemented there, is specific to asphalt. So technically it just doesn't apply. But what does apply is, for example, the dust monitoring. So there are a number of things that can be done. One condition that we would be willing to do is that all of the roads on the site would be paved, for example, because sometimes driving over that is what causes or kicks up some dust on site. There's a requirement for the facility to cease operations. I don't know if you read that condition carefully, but it's included. The environment, your environmental manager pointed that out to you. But we would certainly be willing to install an anemometer on site that can measure that wind, so that there's a correlation, that it keeps a reading of the wind speeds, and then you can see, the county can see, we can provide regular reporting monthly, however often, or upon request, however you prefer. But to ensure that, in fact, operations logs show that operations were ceased when the winds reached those speeds. Baseline monitor, there's also before I get to baseline, a dust control plan in place. It is quite extensive. It requires, the dust control plan was submitted with this application and approved by the environmental manager, or at least reviewed by the environmental manager. It requires regular watering. Sounds like a silly thing, but that's really the only way you can control dust, is to have watering. So there's regular watering on the site that's required. There is a reporting requirement. So internally, all of the watering is tracked on site. And as far as baseline monitoring goes, particulates from wind are not really one of those things that you can baseline monitor, because the wind gusts all the time, and there are a lot of uses in that site that create dust. So there's nothing going on the site now. You can go over there. It's dusty. It's an industrial area, and there are a lot of uses that create dust. So that's difficult without, building a ceiling and walls to say how it is that you would contain the dust on the site. But certainly the dust control plan handles that. And also, now I'm certainly not the expert, and if you have additional questions, the environmental manager can answer this for you. But Brannan has trained staff on site all the time at all of its facilities. And I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but it is a program. It's the same program that CDPHE utilizes, where they are trained to spot opacity. And so when the air gets to a particular opacity, meaning you can see that it's at a particular dust rate, and they are regularly updated in their training, then they shut down operations. So, and I can, Scott, what's it called? EPA Method 9 training, which they are certified. There's someone certified on site at all times, and then they are regularly updated with that training.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Obrusio has an additional question.
Okay, so I see that there's is the fugitive dust control mechanism shall be in place? Is that where the dust plan is actually included? This is a question for staff. Which particular condition would the dust plan be required? I'm looking for it.
Maybe Megan can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's condition 7.
It just says mechanisms in place. It doesn't mention the plan. So what we could do is clarify that there shall be a plan submitted to and approved by the team, or by the applicant to Adams County, and then reviewed on a maybe regular basis to see if additional measures need to be added or modified. You'd be okay with that?
Certainly. Will allow me to ask
I get
my
it.
client, but
It should be already.
it's our, but
Yeah.
we are willing to, yes, but we're willing. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you on that one.
It is included, to Mr. Marvel's point. The dust control plan itself is not a condition. It's already part of this application. It's made a part of this application. But yes, we would certainly welcome a condition that requires updating. And I think it actually requires updating, but we would certainly.
So we can clarify that in
Yes.
number 7, since it's within that same topic.
Yes.
Just to flag, 7 was named, but 10 as well, I think speaks to what Ms. Lizade was saying earlier about the on-site wind monitoring. So 10 in combination with 7, I believe, speak to the highlights of what's included in the plan. Is that correct?
Correct.
So when you talk about adding the actual wind what was the word you used?
Anemometer. It's actually included in 10.
Yeah. There it is. Yeah. So that's going to be in there already. The other question I had was the baseline, I think, is important because it shows all the dust that's there now versus an assessment later. It might actually be helpful for you now, to be honest with you, to show all the dust that exists now so then you don't get blamed for it later if the dust increases so significantly. That, then you can show, no, this is the dust that was before we started operating. Here's the dust now. So somebody who has a complaint about the dust can show. It might actually be a defensive measure for you, but also it helps us be able to show the neighbors that we've created. So I would ask still that we would do the baseline on that piece.
The difficulty with baseline, again, on particulates is that unless it's measured over a very long period of time, if the wind picks up, if there's no wind, there could be no dust. So it's very difficult scientifically to know how to measure that unless, again, it was measured over a very long period of time. You could go out at any point in time and measure baseline, and it just depends on how much the wind's blowing that day, if that makes sense.
Is there a standard for, I'm assuming there's a standard for the baseline monitoring of
No, for so there's a baseline for particulates, but that's for a different exercise, and that really goes to the heavy VOCs that are associated with other uses like asphalt. So, Scott, am I saying this correctly?
Lifeline.
So essentially for the particular, like establishing a baseline, there actually isn't a well-defined standard to do that when you look at like a crushing operation. And Jessica hit on one of the key points is that it's so environmentally dependent and so locationally dependent. It's hard to apply the same standard to the top of a hill than it is to down in a valley, for example. So there's like, as far as bridging out and going from a baseline to a standard, there just hasn't been a ton of regulatory interest in designing a standard there. So then there hasn't really been a whole lot of methodology to build the mechanism for that standard.
Let me clarify. I see what you're saying. There's not a standard for the outcome of that baseline. I'm saying that you could still do a baseline test at the same location, and then you can do that test later and understand that the delta could be attributed to the operations. And I actually think it would actually benefit you. So, because let's say your neighbor complains that there's a lot more dust, and you're able to say, look, our dust is nominal compared to what already existed there. Well, it really doesn't exist to us. I mean, it wasn't about us.
But again, so that's keying in on the geographic part as far as building the standard, but we haven't addressed the time, the length of period that you would collect a baseline over.
Sure, I think that's fair that whatever you would do for a baseline would have to be something that would be emulated if you did a delta test later. I think that makes sense. So I'd still be asking for a baseline. You just get to define what those parameters are. So then if somebody were to do a report later, then you can just use the same parameters. So then you're comparing apples to apples.
If that is an issue, we could take some time to agree on a process. So perhaps if you wanted to advise us, if you need us to step out or to come to some sort of agreement with process on the record, we wouldn't want to leave the process itself open-ended, because then, as just like if Mr. Marvel leaves, then if staff here, someone else leaves, how that gets interpreted down the line could be dicey. But yeah, we would certainly entertain that, yes.
Okay.
I appreciate that. We'll certainly take that under consideration. That's a proposal from Commissioner Odoricio. We do have some more questions. Do you have anything else of additional questions or comments, Steve?
No, I think the only other one is that, is there a requirement that you have that EPA Method 9 person on site? And is that in the conditions, or is it something that you just do as a practice?
It's a requirement.
Of what?
Allow me.
Yeah.
It's my phone a friend.
So our crushers are all permitted through CDPHE. One of the CDPHE requirements is that at all times you have to be able to operate under less than 20% opacity. The way that that opacity is measured is through the EPA's Method 9 certification. And so I always have to have at least one operator there who is certified. It's the same certification as what the state inspector, what the EPA inspector would have. And it's every 6 months, we actually hire someone to come out and train all of our personnel, all of our operators, and essentially what the certification does is they have kind of for lack of better terms, a barbecue that puts out about a bunch of smoke in both white and black. And every 6 months, we are required to recertify, to look at the smoke column, if you will, and be able to quantify, like, this is, roughly 20%, this is 5%, 70%, and so on and so forth. And so that maintaining that every 6 month certification is part of the air permit with the crusher.
Thank you. I will not ask that. That's great. Like, I won't ask for additional condition on that one. I will just make the record. I would feel comfortable with 3 or 4 years, not long term. I think that gives us a chance to show, like, in a few years, if things are going well, you have the ability to show, you have a history to show for an extension or if there's an issue. And then as far as the height stockpiles, I guess I need to understand what's the difference between 25, 35, and 40 feet in function, not just aesthetics. And that would be kind of an open-ended question that might come up either through staff or through my colleagues. So thank you, Jessica.
Thank you all.
So that might be a question for staff.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, Commissioner, just to add from the applicant's perspective, there are some functional reasons for the height. One of them is, as Commissioner Tedesco pointed out, the volume of the plant is a finite amount. And so if, for example, when you're tearing out I-76 for Adams County, you have a large volume that's coming in that has to go somewhere, and you're not producing enough at that very moment where you're sending out the same amounts. So they're dynamic. Those stockpiles increase and decrease. And when you're at a time that's very high production of recycling, for example, then the footprint does have to expand, and it actually causes more dust to have wider footprints or to have more area that's taken. The other reason is just for sound mitigation. So recycling it does create some noise, which is appropriate in an industrial area, but the more that you have stockpiles, the more that buffers sound and buffers wind. It acts as a wind buffer at the site of the recycler. The recycling equipment. So that's the reason that we're asking for that height. We certainly don't anticipate that it will remain at that height, but it's to allow it to be dynamic in nature. Also, you'll notice on the site plans that the footprints where the piles are located are absolutely set out. So piles can't just go wherever they want. They can't be all over the site. They're in a restricted area. So the volume is fully restricted that way. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I believe that concludes Commissioner Odorizio's comments and questions. Other colleagues, Commissioner Tedesco.
No, that's okay. You can go. I just have a question for staff. I know that we have a staff recommendation of 3 years, but we have an ask from the applicant for 4 years. Is there any specific difference in that you want to point out, that you were requesting 3 other than 4? Or is the 4-year request something that we could consider without considering some kind of due process of, just give me an explanation on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's totally up to the board to come to that conclusion, but I think 3 years was just agreed upon by staff to ensure that the applicant kept moving things along. The PD rezoning and the plat both can easily be completed within 3 years, especially 4. But again, 3 years was just to ensure things kept moving along. We felt like 2 was maybe a little too quick, and potentially if there's any sort of back and forth, it takes a while. So we just felt more comfortable with 3.
But 4 years doesn't create any other obstacles other than what we would have had at 3.
Correct. Other than the applicant can take a little bit longer for improvements overall for the site. So the sooner the better in staff size.
All right. And then as far as the anemometer, this isn't something that this isn't specific just to this project. I think we've asked for these in other projects. We've seen these in some of our recycling facilities and landfill facilities. But the baseline, I would be uncomfortable trying to say that you need a baseline for this right now. I think that we need to come up with something in Adams County if we're going to be requiring these around anemometers. If we're going to be requiring a baseline, we need to set up and have a long discussion about what does that look like? What are the parameters behind that? How do we make those applicable across the county? I really kind of am intrigued by that idea, but I just don't know that you can just one-off and implement that on a specific site. I will save my comments for later, but I do not have an issue between the 25 and 35. If 35 provides more protection and gives us a greater benefit, especially to the neighbors, where we can mitigate some of the sound and some of the wind and effects from that, I think 35 is acceptable. I also think that the 4 years is acceptable, not hearing any real basis for the difference between 2, 3, and 4. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Anything else? Not this time? Okay. Seeing nothing else from my colleagues at this time, we did have some open questions for staff. If you could report back out, Megan, or team, on the inspection timeframes, how that will be recorded, and how the information is reported back out and monitored.
Thank you, Commissioner. I actually heard from Katie Keefe, Environmental Programs Manager, so I'll be reporting for her.
Thank you.
Brannan does have 4 sites currently in unincorporated Adams County. One's on West 62nd, one's at LePan Street, as you noted. There's that Pit R location that they are vacating off of 60th and Federal, and the Ready Mix plant. They are inspected at least once every quarter. The new location, if approved, will be inspected monthly for the first year at least, based on inspection findings and rolling compliance status. The new site could move to quarterly inspection schedule. However, anytime compliance issues are found during a proactive inspection, the frequency of inspections increases. For example, quarterly to monthly.
Thank you. I believe the question was originally Commissioner Henry's. Does that answer your question? Okay, that works for me as well. So colleagues, I think that brings back to questions and comments for us. I don't believe there's any particular, unless I'm mistaken and would accept a correction from one of my colleagues, there's any particular asks from a commissioner member to change the staff recommendations at this time.
I do.
Okay, all right, so we'll start with Commissioner Tedesco.
I want to make a motion, but with the amended 35-foot and 4-year.
So if he makes that motion and then it fails for lack of a second or fails, what is our protocol?
It would just go back to the board for other recommendations or motions.
All right. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Henry. Thank you.
Thank you. I personally cannot support 35 feet. I'm at 25 feet. I'm good with that. I can support 4-year expiration of a CUPS. I get that. And I say let's stay with the 25 feet, see how they do in 4 years, and then they can come back. I won't be here. Thank you, God. And you're probably thinking the same thing. Just saying. Yeah, So, but I do support 4 years. I would like to keep it at 25 feet.
All right, so this is the protocol that I'm going to recommend. Commissioner Tedesco, you would like to make a motion if you would like to make it the way you'd like to make it, and then we'll just see what happens.
All right. So I'd like to make a motion for approval of conditional use permits PRC 2023-24 with 14 findings of fact, 4 conditions precedent, 14 conditions and 1 note with the amended 4-year instead of 3-year, and then the amended 35-foot instead of 25-foot.
Okay, so that's the motion. I think we have to do a roll call vote because it's different than how it's on the screen. So we have a motion from Commissioner Tedesco with his 2 amendments. Is there a second? Okay, is there a second? All right, seeing no second, the motion fails. Would someone else like to make a motion, or would you like another attempt?
I will amend. Like to make a motion for conditional use permit PRC 2023-24 with 14 findings of fact, 4 conditions precedent, 14 conditions and 1 note with the single amendment of 4 years instead of 3 years.
Again, I think we have to do it by voice because it's not as written on the screen because he's trying to make an amendment. So, yeah. All right, so is there a second?
Second.
Okay. So at this one, we should probably do a roll call vote to make the record accurate because it's a modification from 3 years to 4 years. Is that correct? Yes, I'm seeing nodding from the attorney. So we will do a voice vote on the approval motion as made by Commissioner Tedesco with the modification that will come back in 4 years instead of 3.
Commissioner Tedesco?
Yes.
Commissioner Henry?
Yes.
Commissioner Hodoracio?
I'd like to first make a statement. I think that this is the right location for something like this. I think I like the idea that some of these uses, particularly with the same operation or similar operations in the company, makes sense. You're going to reduce some of the truck traffic between the two. I like to see the synergies. I would like, and it's not part of this process, I guess, at this time, for us to ask Brannan to work on those other conditions that they were implementing in Douglas County and elsewhere to help continue to raise the bar across their facilities. But that's a separate conversation. And I think if they can do that, they'll be helping show and lead the way on how these types of facilities should be done across the state. So I will be voting yes on this. And so my answer is yes.
Commissioner Baca?
Thank you for calling on me. I'm ready to vote. My answer is yes.
Commissioner Pinter?
Yes, as well. Okay, so that passes unanimously with the conditional use permits with 14 findings of facts, 4 conditions, 4 conditions precedent, 14 conditions, 1 note, as well as a modification for a 4-year renewal. All right, and that concludes our meeting. All right, we'll see you upstairs for study session if that is part of your agenda for today.